welcome to MNN Studios.
Thank you.
I understand one of your members does a program here?
I'm not sure that it's here, but she does a program, yes.
In the Access, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Public
good.
Access.
Well, it might be you'd be interested in it, and we'd help to get you here if you'd like to get a place to communicate and so forth. But I'm really happy to welcome you to the program, and welcome very much to Conversations. A pleasure to welcome to the program Herbert Zweibon. And he's the chairman of an organization. It's called Americans for a Safe Israel. I guess he's been involved in that for a very long period of time, having to do with questions of Israel and the Jewish community, I guess in large sense in terms of the state of the world. And Herbert, welcome very much to Conversations in Manhattan Network.
Good to be here.
My pleasure to welcome you to the program. And I've asked you before we start, if you bear with me, maybe you could share, because we'd like to do this. We have 58 minutes, and we'd like to sort of anchor it on you as it could. And then could you share your own background, where you're born and raised? And then we can get into a conversation about the state of the world, particularly reference perhaps to Israel and the Jewish community in this year of 2005. But could you share your own background, please?
Born in the Bronx.
Uh-huh.
Educated in probably the best school system in the country at that time, right here in New York City. Good high school, Townsend Harris.
Townsend Harris,
yes.
Yeah.
And
you know Maurice Paprin by any chance?
I know the name, but not in my class.
Oh, right.
Maybe a little earlier.
Yeah.
And City College.
What did you study, if I may?
I studied foreign trade, interestingly enough.
Okay.
I was downtown City College. I was interested in Spanish as a language.
Really?
And actually took 5 years. I wish I could use some of it, and I wish I remembered more than I actually do.
Remember all those irregular verbs you had to learn?
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
You know, at the time, it was fairly simple, the phonetic language. And
it is. If you can say the word, you can spell it.
Exactly.
Not the case with
exactly.
New York. Or what about do you know Hebrew by any chance?
No, not really.
No.
Not really. Despite the fact that we've had an apartment in Israel for 20 years now. I can count to 10 in Hebrew.
Well, that's something.
Yes,
that's a beginning, right?
That's a beginning.
Yeah.
And another
and you
20
can say
years.
Shalom.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Perhaps another 20 years I'll decide that I want to learn the language. But actually, you had mentioned the time of my involvement in this organization. It's been 30 years.
Oh, you're just getting the hang of it, I guess.
Just about. And it's not easy, extremely frustrating, but I think at the same time very rewarding. We represent something that is, well, quite different within the structure of the Jewish community. We insist that the land of Israel, all of it, as the League of Nations decided some time back in the 20s, giving a mandate to the British, you probably remember, which included all of what is Western Palestine. And,
Judea and Samaria.
Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, and what is now within the 67 borders, that is the State of Israel. Also included Jordan, by the way, which the British decided should go to an Arab king.
Right.
And, well, that's a reality that exists, and I don't know that anybody's going to change that.
That's the notion of a greater Israel, in a certain sense.
Well, you know,
use that term.
Yes, I hear the term from time to time, and it varies depending on who you talk to. I mean,
if you go back to I think.
Well, yes, if you go back into biblical times, they talk about the rivers in Iraq, today's Iraq. And to the river of Egypt.
And I think Abraham was thought to have come from
He did indeed, yes. And yes, the first of the Jew, our father, and buried in a very interesting place in Hebron, which again is within Judea.
Is that historically understood to be the right place, or is that just
yes.
symbolic?
Oh,
or?
No.
No, really? Okay.
Yeah. I think the Bible is accurate in the purchase of the caves of Machpelah, and the matriarchs and patriarchs, almost all of them, are buried there. And it's become a very special place for Jews. And very interesting that in 1967, after the war in 1967, in which the Arab states were repelled, there began a movement into those areas, particularly with regard to Hebron. And people have been there ever since it was the Passover of 1968.
Is that where there was a gunshot and a lot of people killed at Hebron? Or
No,
something?
well, there was
Goldberg or somebody.
There was, yes.
I forget who his name was.
You had a doctor who,
Yeah.
I think, went off the deep end,
Yeah.
and unfortunately,
under the pressures that do
there
this,
were
perhaps
tremendous.
understandable.
Well,
in
there are
your sense,
pressures,
yeah.
and I don't know that that excuses.
No, I understand.
But
Explains.
yeah,
maybe,
yeah.
I
But
think that's
it's
probably a good stance for us to have in terms of human behavior.
well,
Not
you know,
necessarily excusing something, but understanding why
yeah.
irrationalities
No, I
break
find it
out.
very interesting
Yeah.
that a medical doctor who could have stayed in the United States where he was educated and done very well for himself
Sure.
had decided to go off and make a tremendous economic sacrifice
A lot of
to
people
practice
from Brooklyn
medicine.
is over there going there now. Particularly a lot of those people on the
Well,
West Bank, I understand, are from
They're,
Brooklyn
well,
or from New York.
a good many
Yeah.
from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
I think generally you would say that an observant community, Orthodox observants, found their way to Israel, part of what they considered a biblical requirement, and partly a matter of their Zionist background and training.
They call that making aliyah?
Aliyah is going to Israel. Yes,
To
it means
live.
going. It means going up.
Home. Going up. Does it
It-
mean literally
yes,
up?
literally
Oh,
going up.
I see, right.
And it's very
Is that
interesting.
a term that's been among the Jewish community for a long time, aliyah?
Oh,
Because
yes.
forgive me, I'm a Episcopalian, but I mean that they have this thing, and they've said for decades or centuries, next year in Jerusalem or something, as part of their
Yes.
litany, as it were.
Yes.
Did they have in that litany language aliyah, or did that develop after Zionists successfully,
No,
or
no,
what?
I
Or do you
think,
know? Maybe it's not fair to ask.
well,
Just
no,
curious.
it's perfectly all right. And
Yeah.
I think the term going up always meant going up to the Holy Land.
Uh-huh.
And therein, I think, is the answer to the question of why so many Bible-believing Jews decided to return and create life for themselves and their families in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting, however. Many people say to me, well, you know, what is it exactly that you represent in the land of Israel? And I tell them that there is an organization, and there was a structure right after 1967 and the victory in that war, called the Land of Israel Movement. And amazingly,
Mm-hmm.
people say to me, no, you can't be right, when I tell them that those people came from the left. They were people who lived in Israel, loved the land, understood the Bible, although they may not have believed entirely in everything in Scripture. But there was a deep sense of
Identity.
connection to the land and to the Bible itself
Right.
as a historic document.
Right. No,
And the right-wingers, who are now, you know,
Yeah.
the people that I support and admire in Israel, had to literally fight their way into this structure in order to become part of the land of Israel.
It's interesting because in a certain sense, we just had a conviction down in Georgia or someplace of the fellow that did Schworny chain, civil rights people who were in the 60s. In the spirit of the 60s, it was an era, but overwhelming percentage of the people who went and faced those dogs and fought for the rights of election and so forth
Yes.
were Jewish. They were overwhelming, and they've been associated with what is generally called progressive attitudes toward inclusion of people throughout. They're generally associated with that, and
Yes.
whether or not that's changing now, I don't know. But they almost usually vote Democratic, as I understand, or
Precisely.
if not Trotskyite or something.
Not
you know.
quite that bad.
But you know what I'm
certainly,
saying. They're progressive,
yes.
and they think, and they're
Yes,
thinking
yes.
in progress,
Look,
and justice is very
one
important.
of
you
the
know.
problems,
Those are traditional values of the
problem
Jewish
that I
community.
see in the Jewish community is that they're almost taken for granted. When you consider that 25% of the Jewish vote is considered a great achievement for the Republicans.
Did they ever get that high, do they?
Oh,
Or
they've gotten as high as 40%, very close to 40%.
in a national election?
In a national election.
40% of
Yes,
the Jewish
very,
vote
very close.
was for a Republican?
Yes,
Who did
yes.
they vote for?
Reagan.
For Reagan?
Yes.
That's interesting,
Yes,
isn't it?
yes.
Where
But,
does it stand now? What happened in the last elections? We had this election between
25%.
It down to 25. It reached its peak with Reagan.
Reagan, Nixon, those days where it appeared that the Republicans had a better position for Israel. You have to remember that Richard Nixon, for all his faults and all the problems, was the president who rearmed the Israelis when the going got tough in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War. So
do you think the Jewish community largely sees their position in the world through policies relating to, in an overwhelmingly significant sense, to what is our policy as a country toward this country of Israel? Are there, you know, there are other issues in the world and
yes,
so forth, but you understand what I'm saying?
I
there are
think,
identities wrapped up with that?
I think partially. No, not completely, because I see now, with regard to the current problem in Israel, that is the readiness of the Israeli government to expel Jews from their homes in Gaza.
That seems to be in the works from Mr. Sharon.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Sometimes you have to be careful about what you pray for. And, you know, the Jews who support the integrity of the land of Israel only wanted Arik Sharon as the leader of Israel, feeling confident that he would, in effect, solidify our claims and control.
Forgive me, I'm like I say, I don't pay much attention to it, but I think of him as the godfather of the settler movement in the West Bank. He's the one who encouraged all of that, and he was encouraging that. And I can remember some people say, well, Mr. Nixon, after all, was a conservative Republican. He went to China. So they got that. They said somebody who's conservative might be able to make the peace or something. You know.
Well, yeah, it's a possible theory. I don't agree. I think that Arik Sharon, who was in fact extremely helpful in the movement of Jews into those areas of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. Why he's turned around? There are several theories. We had a member of parliament in Washington this past Wednesday, and he's convinced that it had to do with scandal. That
Scandal?
Yes, that during the election campaign,
something in Cyprus.
Something his
Somebody,
son was
his son
involved.
Was in Cyprus,
yes,
some
yes.
hanky-panky,
Getting a substantial sum of money to encourage the Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox Church to be friendly and helpful to an investor. Well, that's a possibility. I personally find it very difficult to believe that, because it smacks of betraying your country for a personal reason. But whatever.
Not the first time it's probably happened in the history of mankind.
For sure. Sure, absolutely correct. But
anyway,
I choose not to buy this package with regard to Arik Sharon. It may be American pressure, and there is substantial American pressure on the state of Israel.
Do you think the United States has been, as a country, has been overall supportive of Israel, or do you think not? And then I also wonder, maybe we could get back and share with some of the audience, because not everybody's that familiar, even in New York, with it. We could go back to Mr. Herzl and the Zionist thing and everything a little bit. But do you think we've been supportive? We give a great deal, or have given a great deal of aid to Israel and so forth. And a lot of people think that's the leading support, the leading recipient of aid from the United States, plus private sector contributions. And the United States has been, some people, if I may, some people say, if it hadn't been for the United States support, there couldn't be a country of Israel. What do you say to all that kind of thinking?
Well, look,
it would have been a little hard to try and do on their own.
That it's true. $3 billion a year in the aid package.
The most amount to any country.
That's true. That's true. The
and then
Egyptians
comes
get,
Egypt, I guess.
and then Egypt.
And that's tied together, I guess. That aid package is tied together.
If it were not for the Israeli element in the aid package,
there would be no aid.
There'd be no aid package.
Right.
So it sort of set a standard for aid around the world. But here you have some $3 billion that goes into Israel. But you have to remember that a major portion of that has to be spent in the United States on American military equipment for the IDF.
Yeah, I know. That's usually
so
the
I
thing
don't
that
know
goes
what
along
the,
with it. It
yes.
really helps a lot of people here. Yeah.
I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to guesstimate
Yeah.
the amount of profit that an armament company would make on a deal like this. But it's a locked in deal.
Right.
And then
And that applies to probably all those, a lot of those agricultural things and everything, and support the agricultural business to such a degree and everything. Yeah, there's always that problem, particularly when you're getting into really big money. Like now, you got a multi-trillion-dollar economy. There's going to be a lot of leakage and things.
Well, by comparison to the economy, I mean, $3 billion to Israel, which has been reduced somewhat, by the way, is small potatoes. But
there's been many votes in the or in the General Assembly where it's down to Israel and the United States alone.
Yes,
Time
the United
after
States
time after time
has played a very important role, not necessarily in the Assembly, but in the Security Council.
They got the veto. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that the United States, when it became necessary, would use the veto in order to protect the state of Israel.
So it might be true to say if it were not for the support of the United States, the state of Israel would probably not have been able to establish itself?
Well,
or the support from the United States and the Jewish community here that's been very influential, and the Jewish community becoming increasingly empowered through time after the Second War.
Well, I worry about the Jewish community, but leave that aside just for a moment.
Okay.
The fact is that there have been times when the United States has been absolutely essential. As I indicated earlier, Nixon recognized that the Israelis were in deep trouble in 1973. The Egyptians had attacked on Yom Kippur Day, and the Syrians in the north, and they were in deep trouble, running out of capability and weaponry, which Nixon supplied, interestingly enough. So that, you know, a guy who many people will say, well, he wasn't particularly friendly. Some accuse him of more dastardly ideas about Jews and Israel. He was the guy.
He had some nasty things to say personally.
Yes, yeah, but I look. I
want to get to that too.
Yeah, well,
if I could, you get a chance.
You know, I'll
not to him necessarily, but to the cultural. If I could, we at this point in the kind, I would like to get, and you can help straighten me out if you can, because I have never been able to understand anti-Semitism that has been so much a part of the life's experience of the Jewish community. I cannot for the life of me understand where in the world that comes from. And maybe you can help me out, but I didn't mean to take you away from Mr. Nixon.
Well, I was talking about the fact that it was he who decided that there should be an airlift, and airlifted necessary equipment so that the Israelis could ultimately prevail in 1973, which they did at great cost.
Like the Berlin airlift. Remember the Berlin
exactly.
airlift?
Oh, yes, of course, of course.
Yeah, we both are sort of remembering those times.
Well, you know, I served during World War II, believe it or not.
No fooling.
Yes,
you were in World War II?
I was.
How do you look so young to be in World War II?
It's tennis. Tennis does it.
Tennis does it. Thank you. I need your secret.
And a good wife.
Oh, well, that's a good combination. Yeah, okay, yeah.
So,
but in World War II, were you an officer? Or
No. I was, actually, I'd achieved the rank of sergeant. I was supply sergeant in the Aleutian Islands, of all places.
Aleutian Islands. Well, that was the northern flank there to watch. Yeah.
The war was almost over. You know, I'm not that old. I didn't get in early enough.
Okay, good. You weren't in.
I wasn't
at
in
the outset,
any
right?
combat, but
right. That was a war that everybody, the whole country, was totally united behind. I would say, wouldn't you?
Yes.
And there was a spree in the country because you were fighting fascism and that sort of thing, and everything. And then the wars since have gotten a little bit more iffy.
Well,
you know, we had Korea, and then we had that Vietnam fiasco. And you know what I mean? You know.
Look, American people respond to pure evil.
Yeah.
They will respond. And I think many of the people today who support what Bush did with Iraq and Afghanistan understand that in Iraq there was pure evil. Where I disagree is this concept that somehow we're getting off track a little bit, but somehow we're going to create democracy in that part of the world. It doesn't mesh. It doesn't fit together. And I think that we ought to temper our goals and decide on what is best for the United States and its armed forces there. But to proceed on the basis that democracy will develop there or in the Palestine Authority is pure utopian fiction. It's
dangerous,
just, it's not going to happen.
Uh-huh.
And you know, when you're misled by concepts that are unachievable, invariably, you know, people begin to weary of such a policy. So we'll see. But we were talking about.
So you excuse me. You were at the time in favor of the invasion of Iraq?
Oh yes.
You
yes,
were in
yes,
favor of that.
Absolutely.
You noted that there were a great number of people around the world who were very much in opposition.
Oh, I know that. I know that. The
And
Europeans,
that
the Europeans particularly.
And you see the approval now for that is now down to 39%.
Yeah,
And
well,
it's going down.
Yeah,
I mean, that's within the United
yeah.
States population.
Well, there were some who pointed out that during the Civil War, Lincoln caught hell.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
It's happened time and time again with regard to leadership and the patience, the level of patience for the American people who like quick results. We like, you know, I always use the example
particularly
of...
if you're from New York. A New York minute.
Oh,
gotta move, move.
exactly,
Yeah, right,
exactly.
yeah.
I
Yeah,
remember lunch was Needix, a hot dog,
That's
and an
right.
orange drink,
Quick
and off
now,
you
quick.
went.
Yeah, move,
and that
move.
was it.
In
Yes.
New York, yeah,
so,
right, yeah, that kind of
now
thing.
get out of my way. I got to get on the subway.
Right.
But I often compare what we did in Iraq and the pure evil that I understood that was represented by Saddam Hussein and his people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't see it that way, but that's okay. It's
Yeah.
an interesting world. we live in.
1938, had we then decided
Chamberlain.
that there was evil in, that's right. If Chamberlain had not gone off and created this, again, a fiction that we have now achieved peace in our time, 20 million people would not have been killed as a result of World War II.
We had more than that. We had more like 50, I think.
I'm not
and
sure.
25, I believe the Russian figures, I think you had between 20
Russians,
and
yeah.
25 million. They took the brunt.
Yes.
The Russians took the brunt. Stalingrad. Leningrad, they had 600,000 died in that one winter of starvation.
Yes. But consider for a moment,
Real horror.
if we had decided in 1938 that this evil could not exist, that we would not permit it to exist and to flourish and give in to it as we did. So
probably strategic because we hadn't built up much after the
Well,
First World War. That First World War was a terrible thing, and we didn't want to get involved. And Mr. Roosevelt was, you know, constrained by anti-war sentiment in this country that ran very deep.
Yes.
Why should we get involved in European? They've been fighting ever since the beginning of time. They're going to tear each other apart. We don't want to get our boys caught at like we did in the First World War and so forth. And that was the tenor of the time until Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, basic fault lies with the British and the French.
Well, we got
stood up.
somebody to blame it
Yes,
on. The
well,
Brits. Okay.
If they stood up
Yeah.
at that point and said, "Sir, we will
Churchill
not."
wanted to, I think.
Yes. Well, but Churchill was not in power.
That's right.
Not in power.
Mr.
And
Eden. No, Mr. Chamberlain.
Chamberlain.
Yeah.
Chamberlain was
Yeah,
prime minister, and he came back with peace in our time. Well, I'm getting off the track for a little bit, but
That's a major non sequitur, isn't it? We have peace in our time.
Yes.
Just stand by. Peace is going to flow down
but
from the
you
mountaintop.
know, we were in Washington on Wednesday, and a number of congressmen came up to speak to a group assembled there, and each one talked about peace in the Middle East as though it was just around the corner, as though
They're trying to paint a
something
rosy
wonderful,
picture.
something wonderful is going to happen,
Yeah.
and it's not the case. It's very interesting. I had a bit of a tape that I wanted to show, but
It was the wrong
unfortunately,
speed. I'm
I
sorry.
could
well,
not.
on another
it's
occasion.
okay, but
or maybe
I
y'all should start thinking about doing a program over here. You know?
Yeah. Well, okay, but
It's public access. It's open to everybody.
Let me describe what it was that I wanted to show.
Okay.
We had a member of the Knesset, chief medical officer in the IDF, and a surgeon who dealt with skin and plastic surgeon.
Yeah.
And he talked about a young lady who tried to enter the hospital in Beersheba and blow herself up. She had
That's a town in Israel?
Beersheba is a town in
Yeah,
Israel,
okay,
and
yeah.
the hospital was in Beersheba. She had been treated there. She had been treated there for 2 years for a terrible accident that occurred in her own home. It had nothing to do with
Propane
conflict
fire
or
or
anything.
something. Yeah,
Propane
right.
fire, exactly.
Yeah.
And they tried to treat her in the Palestinian controlled hospitals. She was about to expire. The Israelis brought her into Beersheba.
Saved her life?
Saved her life.
Uh-huh.
Not only that, but Dr. Eldad, the member of Knesset who spoke and relayed this story, said that he was responsible for providing the skin that she needed from the skin bank in Israel. He was in charge of the skin bank.
That's a major organ, yeah,
Yes,
right.
and
We did a program a couple days ago with the organ transplant.
Yeah, well,
that should be
yes.
encouraged.
Yeah,
on
I don't
a
know
world
that
scale.
skin is as difficult as
It is,
some.
but the skin, I didn't realize it's the largest organ in the body.
yeah,
It's
so,
the skin, yeah. It's one organ.
Here he was,
Apparently.
involved with saving the life of this young lady. The Israeli doctors literally treated her over and over again, operation after operation, until she was back to what we might consider normal.
Yeah.
And now, 2 years after this accident,
Yeah.
having been saved by the Israelis,
Yeah.
she was prepared to go and blow up the plastic surgery group at this
Where they had done the
particular
work on
hospital.
her and
Yes.
suicide bomb herself.
She
into
was to be a
existence, out of
suicide
existence?
bomber, yes.
Uh-huh.
Fortunately, whatever.
Boy, what is
whatever.
that? What a story.
Well,
what
I
is
think
that saying?
what it says is that the educational process within those areas, the young people in under the aegis of the Palestine Authority are being taught pure hate. And to believe that peace is around the corner when you have a situation in which a young lady, 19 years old, can decide to blow herself up and blow up the people who saved her life.
Right.
So
Why
I think
such hatred? That's a question, and I wonder if we could, because Israel is really, in a certain sense, unique in a certain sense. I wonder if we could go back. We were talking about the Second World War and evil. I'm a little suspect with notions of unmitigated evil and so forth, but because I think they're more, I'm a relativist, I guess. But you go back. Could you help fill me in, Herbert, please? Or because you had 2,000 years of diaspora. You had the Jewish people there. They're up in Russia and in Poland and Germany and that and everything. What is it that was bugging? Let's just say, what was the source? Can you tell? What's the source of anti-Semitism? Where in the world does that come from, and why?
The church.
You would know from a different position. The church.
It came from the church.
The Christian church?
Yes.
That's where it came from.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't have an economic component?
It did in
Seems
some
to me everything's
areas.
economics
Well, there were economics involved in Poland, for example. When the Polish farmers found their way into cities in Poland in order to look for work or for establishing a small business, and found that the Jews had already gotten there, and they were the craftsmen, and they were doing all the work. So you had an economic element, but the anti-Semitism preceded that.
You mean was it anti-Semitism because excuse me, I'm just a PhD guy here looking at everything like that. Is it because they would say that they killed Jesus or something? Is that?
Well,
that's something like the Shiites and the Shia and the Sunni fighting over something that happened 1,000 years ago or in Kosovo or something. It's on that order that it carried through to this modern time, to where they would deliver that kind of evil down on the Jewish people who were so culturally advanced. Is there an element of anti-intellectualism?
We weren't always that culturally advanced.
Remember, you've been culturally advanced all the time.
In Eastern Europe, there was a Jewish peasantry. There was
the shtetl.
Yes, and the shtetl.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen that wonderful play, The
Fiddler.
Yes.
Isn't it great?
And,
Topol.
Yes,
Yeah.
So you had this problem, but it wasn't only a matter of teaching that the Jews were bad because they were responsible for the death of Christ. They also refused. They also refused to convert. They refused to be part of a new community.
Uh-huh.
And wherever there was a problem that existed in Europe particularly, why, you had an easy mark. You had
A
the
scapegoat.
Jews. Yes,
A scapegoat,
the
to
Jews
use
to
the
blame.
modern expression.
Yeah,
I
so,
guess people have been doing that since the beginning of time.
exactly.
They probably
Exactly.
had some scapegoat in a Cro-Magnon cave.
Yeah, well.
Or something, or, you know, I suppose how much it is, but I mean, they had that kind of a thing. But they had, okay, I have a hard time understanding. I had a friend, Israel Shock. Did you ever know Israel Shock?
The name is
Or
familiar
you know
to
him,
me.
he writes?
I don't know him.
He's a close friend of Noam Chomsky. Probably you don't cotton on to Noam Chomsky.
For sure not.
The program that airs today while we're, no, what's today? Monday, tomorrow, is with a fellow who has written a book, Dr. Seth Barber, and it's Conversations with Jewish Critics of Israel. And it's headed by Noam Chomsky and Norton Misvinsky and that.
Yeah,
but
why am I
Israel
not
Shock was a close friend of Noam Chomsky's, intellectuals. And he said, and he wrote a book, said 2,000 years of oppression of religion on the Jewish people. It was over. And he said throughout most of that diaspora up in Russia and so forth, he had a reading of history, and he said, the Jews, for the most part, there were some things, the Jews, for the most part, were pretty good. They were living like, they were bailiffs, they were accountants, they were there. There would be powers, they would serve. They did pretty well on the whole throughout most of that time. And they would, in a certain sense, be serving the lords, the landlords, who were the overlords or whatever, and getting along pretty well, like upper middle class kind of thing. And then what happens when they have some sort of a revolution or something like that, they would be identified as collaborators with the oppressors, you know?
Yeah, well,
Do you think that's incorrect? Or have the Jews been oppressed?
It's partially correct.
But that they did very well, by and large, by the citizens' standards
how
throughout history.
how many managers does someone need on his estate?
Yes,
he only needs one,
well,
or maybe two, or maybe
yes.
yes.
Right.
He doesn't need a whole community of managers.
Yeah.
Now, again, if you have a
but excuse me, that's what Israel Shock said. Why there was animus directed by, let's say, if ever the peasants got it together or something, they were directed at the Mayordomo, the Jew, who was serving the overlords, rather than the Jew being the oppressed one. He was recognized as a collaborator with the oppressors.
Except that
you don't think that holds?
No, I don't think.
Okay. I'd like to put that away if I could. You know,
well,
but he was pretty. He had chapter and verse on that.
I think that there were enough reasons to look at the Jewish community and find reason for hate. But I believe bottom line had to do with the concept of Jesus having been murdered by the Jews, supposedly.
He was a Jew.
I understand he was a Jew. Yes, okay.
Yeah.
I know that. I find it very interesting that there are many Christians today who feel so deeply about Jesus and that period that they literally want to put themselves back into Israel and be part of that first century to see if they could relive this experience. I don't think it's possible, but okay, it happens for some people.
See, okay, so it's that?
Oh,
it
yes.
doesn't have anything to do with the fact that they were the ones who got to be with the money lending because they couldn't own land and that kind of stuff. I'm trying to find some sort of reason that there's such hate. What was it with Hitler? What was with him that he had such a thing about I don't understand why. Like, when I think Jewish, I think smart. And I think very, very creative, and I think very intellectually advanced. You got Einstein and all these things, and progressive, and and socially conscious, in a long-held a prophetic sense of justice as part of their core. So what is there to hate about these people?
No, I think
Set me straight.
I think that's
And if it's just that they did something back
not altogether, not well.
But this is a major
It resonates.
thing.
It resonates with people.
This is a major thing about the establishment of Israel, because you had this anti-Semitism. You had to get a place finally where you could protect your interests.
Absolutely.
And why can't we have one? So and it was the anti-Semitism that was the cause of this. Don't you think so? We should try to understand where the heck does that come from?
Well, look,
From your
I can only
You're
explain.
Jewish.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I can only repeat that it began with the church. It began with problems of refusing to convert. In Islam, for example, Jews and Christians were considered what they call dhimmi, second-class citizens, all through the Muslim world, to the point where in Yemen or in Egypt or any of the other places, a Jew couldn't ride a horse because he would be taller than the Muslim walking in the street. So that was not.
The Muslim could ride a camel. Camels
They
higher
could
than
ride.
a horse.
Well, okay, but you could, if you were a Jew, you could not. You could not, and there were restrictions and taxes, special taxes. So there was discrimination there, which had nothing to do with the church or Jesus. It had to do with Islam, saying these people refused to come and join this great movement of ours, and of course it was extremely successful.
You mean the Christianity?
No, Islam.
Oh,
spread.
Islam was, yeah. Well, Christianity was successful after
Yes,
Constantine.
yes.
Yeah.
And by the way, Christianity, I think, is now even more successful than
More successful than
Islam.
Than Islam.
Yes.
Do you think Mr. Huntington's right that we got a clash of civilizations
For
coming?
sure.
Do you think the evangelical Zionists, the Protestant Zionists, are correct in trying to bring on Armageddon so that we can have the rapture and all that? That's coming right out of the Bible.
I'm one who works very closely. I mean, my group works very closely with Christian Zionists. And
There are a lot of them now.
Oh,
They're
yes,
very powerful
yes.
base for Mr. Nixon.
well,
Mr. Bush.
I would say that the last election you could
Was won by them.
attribute
Yeah.
the 3 million plurality to this community, the
I think so.
Christian
40,
community.
I think 40% of his power base is from that.
Yes, but not because of Israel. It was a matter of values, what they perceived as values which he offered, and apparently they couldn't see.
But they are overwhelmingly supportive,
Of
unquestionably, of the state of Israel, and I suppose you count them as allies in terms of the way you see things. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And why are they that way? Because they think they're going to have the rapture brought on.
They believe
and it's Armageddon, it's John and Revelation.
No, you don't have to go that far.
Okay.
The Bible says very specifically that there is a covenant.
Yeah.
There's a covenant between God and Abraham, Isaac and Jacob.
Right.
There's a covenant which said, I give you this land for you and your generations. And this is what they believe. They understand that for them, the Bible, Scripture, is extremely important. And why are they called fundamentalists? Because they believe. They believe what the Bible says. And it is quite clear that the covenant requires that the Jewish people have what is
all of it.
The land of Israel. Look, as far as I'm concerned, being somewhat realistic, I'll take from the river to the sea, and the present borders that Israel controls, Judea, Samaria, Gaza, and
you don't want to extend it to Ur.
Look,
who
who needs all this trouble?
Yeah, who needs all that
this trouble?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
well, okay, that's your position. Yeah, there are
yes.
some people who have a more extreme.
Well,
and then also
but
the notion
is it realistic? It's not realistic. I don't believe. But the end of days concept.
Yeah.
I don't know how many buy onto that. Maybe they do. I don't
I've
care.
done some programs with the Turk people, Rabbi Dome out of London, and it is true, isn't it? Even after Herzl and all that, Jabotinsky and that. But no, before that, you had when they first came, they were just a few people. They were radicals in their time, the early time, the Zionists, and that all of the rabbinical or the Jewish community were very much against the idea of returning, because they claimed, and then Turk still do, that there's no way you can read the Torah to say that they should, at the end time, reestablish themselves in the Holy Land except through a totally peaceful means. And they also want to say it is the Moshiach who will take you there.
Exactly.
And who's Ben Gurion? He's no Mashiach, as far as I can tell, and that kind of thing. They have that argument. But now, as they became more successful, politically and practically, more and more Lubavitch came over and that kind of thing. But a lot of those...
You have to differentiate between these groups. And Turakata or the Satmar.
The Satmar, too, there's a lot of...
Well, they are Satmar.
Yeah.
Those people are anti-Zionist.
They're the strongest anti-Zionists in the world because they say it's a blasphemy.
You need a kingdom, you need the Messiah, and then you can
Universal
have the state.
justice. There must be universal
Well,
justice.
I'm not so sure. Give them their
That's what
kingdom.
they seem
Give
to.
them their kingdom, and give them the Messiah. And
Well, if the Messiah walked in this room, it really would change things, wouldn't it? And do we give up on
the
the
question
idea?
is,
Did
would
the
we,
Jews give up on the idea, the prophetic notion of Mashiach?
the Jews?
Or because it is, they say that they feel it strongly. Those Neturei Karta are really strong. They burn the flag and everything. And they say that it is a blasphemy to hasten things and the Mashiach, and in that sense, it's a heresy of the Torah, that it's not Torah true and it's not Jewish. They say it's not Jewish. It's a transformation of loyalties to, it's like a Constantinian bargain with power, a Faustian bargain with power that the Jews have bought into and have been transformed from Judaic, from Torah true Jews to...
All right, let's be practical.
Okay.
As a
They're not being practical with that argument.
Being practical
no, right.
at all.
But they
and
make
the fact
argument.
is that the Jews, having been put upon, as you say, for 2,000 years.
Well, Israel Shach said that's not the case. For most of that
well,
time, they lived pretty well. They were like upper middle class like they are now.
Where? In Germany?
No, in Russia and in other places. This is the claim he made. It's a good book.
Yeah, I think.
You see, they're very together. And they're, but anyway.
I think he's off the track.
And they say that notion of pogroms all the time is overdone.
Look at the 6 million who were slaughtered during World War II.
That's that irrational hatred. I can't understand.
Okay, and that had, you're talking about a democracy, Germany. This man was elected,
Bach,
right?
Beethoven,
right.
all of that.
These great names.
And the Jewish community was very highly part of that. They were embedded in that.
They did their best to become part of the German society.
And they were.
Yes.
And they were.
Okay. So
how
this business about these people lived in great privilege, I think that's pure nonsense. But okay, it's not important.
Not in great privilege, but upper middle class. They never could rule.
Some.
But they lived well. Like
look, my parents came to this country in the 1920s.
From?
My mother from Czechoslovakia, my father from the Ukraine. They left home. Why? Because there wasn't food on the table.
That's a hard scrabble route. Right.
The immigration of Jews from Eastern Europe had nothing to do with finding gold in the street. It had to do with finding
survival.
Food. Food to eat and a place to stay.
What, your parents, you say?
My mother came.
We had a bunch came in the 80s and 1880s and 90s?
1920s.
1920s. They were still there, and they were coming in great numbers,
No, my mother, I think, was 16 or 17
and
years
they
old.
have contributed so mightily to the advancement of human knowledge. I mean, you think of every field. Every field they've contributed. I come back to this. Maybe it's an anti-intellectualism. The people are very progressively thinking. They're socially conscious. They've got a justice. They contribute intellectually to every field, science, art, everything like that. So maybe it's just that there's an anti-intellectual quality that they see the Jews as being smart-ass and that they're so smart. And
I don't know. You mean here in the United States?
I have a hard time understanding where the world it came from because I like smart people. Yeah.
Well, look, intelligence doesn't seem to have any particular bearing on hate. You can be extremely intelligent and hate just as vigorously
You can hate good. Why does somebody hate a culture that manifests practically all good qualities? Justice, knowledge, advancement of the sciences and arts, and all of these things, as much as they have, and the cultural institutions that the Jews have contributed. Why in the world would somebody hate that culture?
Let's put this into the Zionist concept and talk about Israel. Because there, the Jews have finally established themselves as a political entity. What has happened during this Zionist revolution, I characterize it as a revolution. You had what? You had the rebirth of a language. You had the
Ben Yehuda?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Ben Yehuda did a modern.
Yes.
Is there a big difference between modern Hebrew and ancient Hebrew?
Yes.
Did you have to?
Yes. Yes.
Did you study Hebrew in college?
No.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm not the expert.
Okay, yeah.
The rebirth of a language. People who were oppressed for all these 1,000 years, 2,000 years, an army, a nation.
They were empowered.
Yes, tremendous, tremendous achievement.
Yeah.
And you know, I must point out that what the Israelis did in terms of reaction to terror was to set a standard for the world. Entebbe, for example, showed the world that you could respond to terror in a way that put it down, and they did it. They did it. They would search out people who were responsible for killing Israelis here or there or whatever.
Yeah, they went to Uganda.
And do their thing. So
is that Dayan or his brother or something?
Netanyahu's brother. No, Dayan was not
wasn't involved in
no,
Entebbe.
no,
Who was the hero of Entebbe? Was that Barak? No,
no. It
Barak?
was Yoni Netanyahu.
Netanyahu.
Bibi Netanyahu's brother.
He's even more conservative
Yes,
than
and
Mr. Sharon.
He was one of the guys who...
was he involved in the raid itself or his brother?
The brother, Yoni.
Wasn't
Yoni
he,
did
but
not
he-
survive. Did not survive the raid.
Yeah, right.
And but there were examples of behavior that, you know, set standards for the world in terms of how you react to terror, and the standards still exist. Although I begin to wonder about what the Israelis are doing with regard to the terror ongoing in Israel. We know, for example, that people in the IDF say, "Give us a green light, we'll finish the problem of terror." Hamas
IDF is the Israeli Defense Forces? Did you know a man named Dr. Theo Golan?
No.
Theo Ben Golan? He was like Surgeon General. He's a friend of mine. He's a really nice guy. They're nice. And he was responsible for the counter biologic. He was like Surgeon General in Israel, whatever that is comparable
Well, I know
to.
what it is, yes. Top military medical officer in the Israel Defense
And then
Force.
he was also responsible for setting up an anti-biological system for protecting the population against biological.
Sure.
Real nice guy.
There have been so many introductions in the military field because of the necessity in Israel in order to defend itself. I mean, we're dealing
Theo
with...
Dove Golan was his name. Theo Dove.
It's a familiar name, but I'm afraid
Sorry,
I
I
don't
didn't.
know. No, it's okay.
Yeah.
But
Nice guy.
yeah,
Really bright.
Well, look, when you sit down with an Israeli, in most cases, you'll find, good people, reasonable, and all the rest.
I think if you sat down with individuals everywhere in the world, you'd probably find that. Do you think?
I'm
Do you
not
think
so
some people
sure.
are genetically
I'm not
evil
so
or
sure.
something?
No, not genetically.
No.
But try that with some of the Islamic theologians and see where you get with regard to
If
trying
you
to
could get to
convince
his
them.
cave, you could try and talk to Bin Laden or something like that.
It's pretty horrible stuff. But there is a reality about how this animosity developed within the Muslim world. What is it that is so distasteful?
Do you think it's anti-Semitism? The old anti-Semitism?
Well, only partly.
Only partly. Okay. So we'll get down to what it is.
Getting
really.
back to my revolutionary concept,
Yes, please.
you have a people from the outside.
Yeah, the Europeans.
The Europeans.
That's what it is.
Well,
these people around the world had colonialism for a few hundred years.
800,000 Jews came from the Arab countries.
Okay.
So you had,
Were they Sephardic? Is that
Sephardic,
Sephardic?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that what they are
Yes.
when you say the Arab?
Well,
or
Sephardic
pretty much.
actually means people who originally came from Spain, and many of them
When Ferdinand and Isabel threw them out.
Yes,
Yeah.
North Africa,
Yeah.
Turkey, and all the rest.
Muammar
Yemen.
Gaddafi may have been one of those, or associated.
I don't know.
Yeah,
You
but
think he
anyway,
was
I
Jewish?
didn't.
In any
maybe
case.
Gaddafi's Jewish. Maybe Columbus is Jewish. Yeah.
That an outside invader could come into what they consider their turf,
Right.
the land of Islam,
Right.
and not only take control of that piece of land,
Set themselves up as a regional superpower.
but reject all attempts to eliminate them. Now,
Well, wait a minute, if I may, because they just had, since Columbus, the whole world has been colonized by Europeans. And the British set up their thing in India. They had the French in Indochina. They had the French in Algeria. They had them all over Africa. They went in all over the world. The Europeans had expanded out 500 years. And after the Second World War, the whole zeitgeist seemed to say the Europeans will, at least in terms of open colonial power and control and settlement and so forth, they will retreat. That's what a lot of that was done. That's why they had to form the United Nations. You're going to have all these independent countries, and the indigenous culture is going to emerge. And that would, remember, the British went from the Raj. We had a fight in Vietnam that was nationalist. They had Algeria, was a horror.
Yes.
And then opposite to that thrust of the European retreating back to Europe, the one example where there was an opposite movement in that were the Jews, the Europeans, moving into a colonial, and it'll be seen in the minds of many as just another colonial expression of European overlordship of their local culture.
You have to be very careful that you don't oversimplify.
Well, yes, that's true.
Because if you go back into the 19th century, 1850s, 60s, 70s, when travelers went to the Holy Land, people like Mark Twain, a number of important French people, some British Zionists who traveled through the country and found it desolated. Nothing. A few Bedouin tribes who would set upon you if you weren't careful and didn't have protection. But the reality is that it was not a movement of a group of people taking control of another group of people, because there was nobody there. When did the Arabs begin to return to this desolate place?
Well, I wasn't taking it just on the Arab thing or even Israel, because that's the thing. They say it was an empty land. People can go where there's nobody there. And we said that about the American Indians. We did that. And this was irretrievable, the thing that happened in North America. But it was like from the British coming out of the Raj and stuff. And out, it was that thing. And then establishing a system of running things. It's like what they called colonialism. So they're going to colonialize the overlordship of the benighted masses, the white man's burden, the European, all of that. That was
that may be true in other
characteristic
parts.
of the 19th century.
I don't accept the analogy for Israel. I don't accept that.
But they were
Israel.
Europeans by and large.
There were
that
Europeans
and
a number of Arab Jews from Arab countries who had come back after 1948. But the reality is that the so-called people who are being colonialized did not come until the Jews came and set up some economic advantage for them. So you took this place that was desolate
and made the blizzard bloom
and made it a
bloom.
place. Yes.
Yes.
So now you have another problem for the surrounding neighbors. You have 1 million Arab citizens, a little more than 1 million Arab citizens within the state of Israel. Israeli citizens who are Arab, with seats in the Knesset, they do not have to serve in the army. Some, the Druze and Bedouin, do serve in the Israel Defense Forces. The others do not have to. But think of what this represents. It represents over 1 million Arabs living in a democracy.
Well, that's the West's notion of a democracy is followed, and that they say there's a democracy there. There seems to be a great deal. Do you think there's a tie-in between that view of things and, let's say, Israel being a bastion of democracy or Western values in that part of the world had something to do with why we went into Iraq?
No.
Or not?
No.
You don't think it was to, in a certain sense, protect
no, not at all.
the Israeli thing against the...
Yeah, there was somebody in the CIA
because a
who
lot
just
of those
made the claim.
neocon people are of that, Wolfowitz and these
Yeah,
people.
but the neocons talked about
They're
Iraq.
part of that neocon.
Yeah,
The Likudniks are part of the neocon group.
Again, it's not accurate.
No?
The neocons recognize the evil in Iraq. They recognize that Huntington was correct in his...
Well, I don't accept Huntington.
Well,
I think a lot of people don't.
You don't think that we're in a conflict with Islam?
I don't think we may be in a conflict, but I don't think the idea that there's something to being a class of civilizations. No, I mean, a lot of people don't. I think much of the world does.
That may be. I happen to believe that Islam represents a threat to the West. I believe that very deeply. And I believe that unless we begin to recognize that you are having reverse colonization in Europe today. This nice lady, Batye Or, an Egyptian Jewess, has just written a book called Eurabia.
Yeah, I saw her on C-SPAN the other day.
Did you?
Yeah, I read it.
The
She
woman,
was interesting.
the woman is brilliant.
Yeah.
And what she writes, if you read the book, it's not an easy read.
Okay.
But
You've read,
detail
yeah?
yes,
Okay,
I
yeah,
have the
good.
book. We have it in the office. If,
Good.
we'll be
Yeah, we
happy
got to
get
let
you-
people know about
We'll
the
get
yeah.
you. We'll get you a copy.
I
of
would
it.
love it. Yeah, sure.
She points out that beginning in the early 70s,
Mm-hmm.
the European countries were so determined to develop a better relationship with the
Oil?
Arab country. Oil.
Yeah.
Oil.
Imagine
oil
that,
and
huh?
bread.
Yeah,
Oil
right,
and
right.
bread. So you had this problem. We're told that within 20 to 30 years, every third voter in France,
Will be Muslim.
yes,
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
heavy stuff.
Well,
Very
okay.
heavy stuff.
Maybe so, yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, the
difference-
world is becoming a village. Ms. Marshall
No,
McLuhan.
no. I don't agree
Oh.
because this community does not integrate.
Mm.
Does not integrate.
Which community?
The Islamic
I thought you
community.
said the Jewish community integrated into the Christian.
No.
That's why they hated them, because they wouldn't
But
integrate.
well,
They wouldn't assimilate.
They wouldn't.
They just
they
held
wouldn't
on to
beca-
their
no,
old
no, no.
ideas that are outdated.
They wouldn't. They
No,
wouldn't become
not the same.
Christian. They
All
wouldn't.
right.
It's not
Right,
the same.
well, then in this case,
no,
they
but
won't
they
become
did
Western.
integrate. I
All
mean,
right.
You look at every one of the law firms, the big law firms in New York City,
Yeah.
and you see 2 Irish names, 2 Jewish names, and,
Yeah,
and
right.
an Italian name. And
Pretty
so,
integrated,
Okay,
yeah.
so
Yeah.
there you are.
Yeah.
No, but this is different. This is different. This is a community that is imposing
Intractable,
itself
huh?
and intractable and completely integrated within itself.
Uh-huh.
And I think Chirac made an attempt to say no more wearing of the
Oh, the
headgear,
headscarf,
the
yeah.
headscarf.
Yeah.
You can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, come
Well,
on,
it's a
come on.
big question. You know, the heck of it is, Herbert, we've run out of time. We could talk for 15 hours easy. It's a pleasure. I'm sorry we've run out of time. Thank you very much for coming in and sharing this with me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And
My
we
pleasure.
could go on to, it's a big issue. It's a huge issue. It's one I agree with you. And I have to remind the audience, it's been your pleasure to have the perceptions of Herbert Zweibon. And he's the chairman of an organization. Let me show you what their output, their thing. Their brochure is called, the institution is Americans for a Safe Israel. Something to be devoutly desired.
Yes.
A safe Israel and a safe planet would be a
Safe
good
planet,
goal.
yes.
Maybe the two go together.
And a safe America.
In your view.
We're interested in safety around the world.
All right, but in these times of nuclear annihilation, it's a good idea to be on the side of that.
Absolutely.
And your pleasure, we invite you. We'll come back again tomorrow. Once again, Herb, thank you really very much for all the work and for coming in, and let's
very
be
welcome.
in touch by all
Yes.
means and everything, and hash this stuff
Ask
out.
us back again. We'd be happy to come.
All right, or maybe you could think about setting up your own program. This is open to anybody. You could have a series here. This is public access, so
Yes,
it's
I know,
open to
I
everybody.
know.
You don't have to be, edited by the
No, I
New York
understand.
Times
I
or any other
understand.
organization. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
You could.
our
It's a
group
place
is
where you can
involved.
voice
Yeah, we're
your
involved
own
in
thing.
public access, and we have a half-hour program.
Oh, you
every
do?
week. Yes, sure.
Good deal. What's it called?
It's called Update.